The mist rises gently from the rolling hills, curling softly around ancient oaks and whispering through the dark green valleys of a land shaped both by nature's hand and human imagination. In these faraway reaches, where rivers carve slow, winding paths and stone circles stand silently against the sky, the echoes of a long-forgotten past linger like a quiet song. The Celtic lands, stretching across Ireland, Scotland, and Wales, were a tapestry of dense forests, mist-laden plains, and rugged coastlines. Every hill, every stream, seemed alive with stories that were spoken in low voices, told by flickering fires, and remembered in the rhythm of daily life. The people of these lands lived in harmony with the seasons, guided by the cycles of nature, yet constantly aware of forces beyond the visible world, forces that would shape their myths, their heroes, and their gods. These lands, now quiet and serene, were once vibrant with activity. Villages made of timber and thatch dotted the valleys, and small settlements hugged the edges of rivers, where fishing and farming sustained life. But it was not only the work of survival that occupied the hearts of these people. They listened to the wind as if it carried messages from unseen realms, and they watched the flight of birds and the phases of the moon for signs of the unknown. The Celts perceived the world as alive in every sense, and in this living world, the boundary between what was tangible and what was mystical was delicate and permeable. Light danced on the river's surface at dawn, while shadows gathered at the edges of the forest, creating a contrast that would inspire both awe and caution, the very contrast that formed the foundation of the myths that would endure for centuries. The rivers themselves seemed to hold secrets. Flowing steadily through glens and over moss-covered stones, they whispered tales to those who paused long enough to listen. Some spoke of heroes who crossed treacherous waters in pursuit of destiny, others of deities who shaped the river's courses with unseen hands. These stories were not always spoken aloud. Many were carried in the silence of the landscape, remembered in the patterns of animal tracks, the turning of the seasons, and the quiet rustle of leaves overhead. The land itself became a storyteller, speaking in imagery, sensation, and subtle symbolism, an unending source of mystery for those willing to perceive it. The hills were crowned with stone monuments, some arranged in perfect circles, others in seemingly random clusters, their purposes known only to those who first placed them. Standing stones and ancient mounds hinted at gatherings, rituals, and ceremonies that blurred the lines between the human and the divine. Even today, the stones stand solemnly, their surfaces worn smooth by wind and rain, yet somehow retaining the echoes of chants and footsteps from long ago. One can almost feel the presence of figures moving silently among them, silhouettes of humans who existed in a world where every hilltop might be a gateway to the other world. The contrast between the physical permanence of these stones and the ephemeral lives of those who built them reminds us that history is both enduring and fleeting, known and unknown. Forests stretched thick and untamed, their shadows shifting with the sun, concealing hidden glades where deer moved silently and owls watched with unblinking eyes. In these woods, stories of spirits and mystical creatures took shape, passed from one generation to the next. The Celts believed that certain places held particular power, that sacred groves were homes not only to trees, but to forces beyond human comprehension. Here, the veil between reality and myth was thin, and the imagination of storytellers transformed the ordinary into the extraordinary. It is in these liminal spaces, where light met shadow and day met night, that the foundation of Celtic myth was laid, a foundation that still resonates in the rhythm of the land itself. Even in modern times, when quiet roads and distant farms now inhabit these landscapes, there's a lingering sense of the past. One can walk along a foggy riverbank or through a windswept valley and feel a connection to a time when the world seemed both smaller and infinitely larger, when human understanding brushed against the edges of mystery. This delicate interplay of the known and unknown, of familiar landscapes and hidden truths, sets the stage for the stories that will follow, inviting listeners to surrender to the quiet magic of forgotten myths. As night falls softly over the hills and the wind carries a faint, timeless whisper, one can almost hear the beginnings of tales that have survived through centuries, stories of gods, heroes, and creatures whose presence is felt even when unseen. It is here, amidst the gentle sway of trees and the echoing call of distant rivers, that the Celtic world begins to reveal itself, slowly, poetically, and patiently, drawing the listener into a journey through both history and mystery, into the calm, immersive realm of forgotten myths waiting to be rediscovered. The air in the ancient Celtic lands seemed to hum with unseen presence, a quiet resonance left behind by the gods and goddesses who once walked these hills and valleys alongside the people who revered them. In the soft light of dawn, when mist clings to the rolling meadows and the first birds stir in the trees, one can imagine the divine figures moving through the landscape, their essence woven into the fabric of rivers, forests, and stone circles. Unlike the gods of some other cultures, the Celtic deities were not distant beings living in ivory towers. They were intimately connected to the lives of humans, guardians of natural order, guides in times of uncertainty, and sometimes enigmatic tricksters who reminded mortals of the fragile balance between light and shadow, order and chaos. In their presence, the ordinary world took on a quiet, luminous quality, as though every leaf, every ripple of water, carried a fragment of their awareness. Among these deities, each had a role, a domain, and a personality that reflected the complexity of the natural and spiritual worlds. Dagda, often called the good god, was a figure of strength and wisdom, whose cauldron could provide endless sustenance, symbolizing abundance and the cycles of life. In contrast, the Morrigan, the phantom queen of battle and fate, embodied both awe and unease. Her appearance is a reminder of mortality and the inexorable flow of destiny. These contrasts, the nurturing and the destructive, the gentle and the fearsome, revealed the depth of the Celtic understanding that the divine was not simply benevolent or malevolent, but a reflection of the complex interplay of forces in the world. It was in this interplay that myths found their resonance, balancing light and shadow in a way that mirrored human experience while elevating it to the mystical. The Celts also honored deities connected to the landscape itself. Lugh, a god of craft, skill, and sunlight, moved through the fields and valleys, bringing warmth and inspiration. Brigid, goddess of poetry, healing, and fire, whispered through the hearths of villages, her presence both comforting and mysterious, reminding people of the subtle magic in daily life. These gods were not abstract concepts. They were experienced in every gesture, every seasonal change, every shared meal, and every moment of reflection. They were companions and guides, observers of human triumphs and follies alike, their stories blending seamlessly with the rhythms of the natural world. The quiet intimacy of these deities invited a sense of wonder, as listeners might sense both familiarity and the gentle shadow of mystery in their enduring presence. Yet, for all their closeness, there remained an aura of secrecy, a sense that the full extent of these divine beings could never be comprehended by human minds alone. Some deities appeared in visions or dreams, slipping through the veil of everyday life like shadows at twilight. Others lingered in the half-seen corners of the forest, their forms suggested by rustling leaves, distant calls of birds, or the sudden, inexplicable warmth of sunlight breaking through clouds. The contrast between the tangible and the intangible, between what could be known and what remained unknowable, created the delicate tension that gave Celtic myths their timeless allure. It is this tension, the balance of familiarity and enigma, that continues to draw us toward these ancient stories, as if the gods themselves whisper just out of reach, inviting quiet reflection and imagination. In addition to individual deities, the Celts perceived the sacred in the multiplicity of spirits inhabiting the world. Rivers, springs, trees, and stones were considered dwellings of lesser divine beings, each with its own character and temperament. These spirits were not always gentle. Some could mislead travelers, conceal hidden treasures, or exact small punishments for carelessness or disrespect. Through these interactions, the lines between the known and the unknown blurred, and the world became a layered tapestry of visible life and invisible guidance. Every path taken, every river crossed, and every stone circle visited might be accompanied by unseen eyes, observing, teaching, or simply existing as part of a vast, interconnected spiritual ecosystem. As myths were passed down, the stories of gods and goddesses became intertwined with human actions, creating narratives that taught, warned, and inspired. Feasts might honor love with competitions of skill, while tales of the Morrigan reminded warriors to respect fate and mortality. In the quiet moments between labor and rest, villagers might recount how Brigid blessed their homes, or how Dagda's laughter could turn misfortune into abundance. These stories carried lessons encoded in symbolism and allegory, inviting reflection while keeping the magic alive. In the soft cadence of retelling, the gods became both companions and enigmas. Their presence felt more than seen, their whispers lingering in the spaces between thought and sleep. It is in this gentle interplay of reverence, mystery, and daily life that the Celtic pantheon leaves its most enduring mark. The gods and goddesses are not merely figures of legend. They are the embodiment of a worldview in which every element of existence, day and night, light and shadow, joy and sorrow, exists in delicate balance. For the listener, allowing oneself to enter this quiet world is to sense the contours of a civilization attuned to both the known and the unknowable, a place where myth and reality intertwine like the weaving of a tapestry, forming patterns that guide, teach, and quietly mesmerize. And so, as the winds continue to stir the ancient hills, one can almost hear the echoes of forgotten gods, inviting the imagination to wander, to listen, and to discover the subtle magic hidden in the Celtic world. In the Celtic world, nature was not merely a backdrop for life. It was a living, breathing companion, a guide, and a teacher. Every sunrise carried the promise of a new cycle. Every river's flow whispered a quiet continuity, and every change in the wind spoke of forces beyond human understanding. The Celts observed these rhythms with a reverent attentiveness, learning to read the signs of the land as carefully as they read the stars in the night sky. Their festivals and rituals were often timed to the movement of the sun and moon, the turning of the seasons, and the subtle shifts in the natural world, reflecting an intimate knowledge of life cycles. Through this careful observation, the Celts cultivated a profound sense of harmony with the environment, a balance between human activity and the eternal pulse of the earth itself. The seasons shaped not only the daily lives of the Celtic people, but also the structure of their mythologies. Samhain, the festival marking the transition from autumn into winter, was a time when the boundary between the worlds of the living and the dead grew thin. During these long, shadowed nights, fires were lit to honor ancestors, and tales of spirits and otherworldly beings were recounted beside flickering flames. Beltane, the festival of spring, celebrated growth, fertility, and renewal, a joyous acknowledgement of the land's abundant energy. Each festival, each ritual, was a reflection of the profound respect the Celts had for the natural cycles that governed their lives. And through these ceremonies, they reinforced their connection to the unseen forces that shaped their world. Rivers, lakes, and springs were especially revered, considered portals through which divine energy flowed and where mystical beings might dwell. Water was life, cleansing and sustaining, yet it also represented mystery and transformation. The gentle ripples of a river could reflect the sunlight like 1,000 tiny mirrors, while the hidden depths below might conceal secrets or treasures known only to those attuned to the land. The Celts believed that offerings to these waters could bring blessings or guidance, and they would leave gifts of grain, tools, or small crafted objects as a sign of respect. The delicate interplay between giving and receiving, between human intention and natural force, imbued even simple acts with ritual significance, emphasizing the sacredness embedded in everyday life. Forests, too, held profound significance. The dense, shadowed woods seemed to breathe with a life of their own. Oaks, yews, and hazels were not simply trees. They were sentinels, teachers, and protectors. Sacred groves, hidden deep within these forests, were places where druids and villagers alike might seek counsel, perform rituals, or simply meditate in the quiet presence of living beings older than memory. These groves were liminal spaces, where the ordinary world touched the extraordinary, and stepping beneath the canopy of ancient branches was akin to entering a sanctuary. The rustling leaves, the soft murmur of streams, and the distant calls of birds created a meditative soundscape, a natural symphony that reminded the Celts of their place in a larger, interconnected cosmos. The Celts also watched the skies with careful attention, noting the cycles of the moon and the passage of the sun across the heavens. Lunar phases dictated the timing of certain rituals, guiding agricultural practices and spiritual observances alike. The solstices, the longest and shortest days of the year, were especially sacred, marking the zeniths and nadirs of the solar cycle. During these times, communities would gather to celebrate the eternal rhythm of day and night, light and darkness, growth and rest. The contrast between the sun's life-giving warmth and the quiet, enveloping shadows of night provided a tangible metaphor for the dualities that infused Celtic mythology, reinforcing lessons about balance, patience, and the inevitability of change. Animals, too, were considered reflections of these sacred rhythms. Deer, foxes, and birds were not simply creatures to be hunted or observed. They were symbols of the qualities and forces that the Celts revered. A deer might represent gentleness and swiftness. A bird could symbolize communication with the other world, and a fox might embody cunning and adaptability. Observing these creatures in their natural habitats allowed humans to perceive patterns in life and nature, teaching lessons without words, guiding decisions, and inspiring mythic stories that would later be told around fires and in sacred spaces. In this way, the animal world was a living library of knowledge, a source of insight for those willing to listen quietly and patiently. Even the smallest details of daily life were aligned with the sacred rhythms of nature. The planting of crops followed the cycles of the moon, and the gathering of herbs or berries was timed to ensure maximum potency. Simple tasks, such as lighting a fire or drawing water, were performed with a mindfulness that connected humans to the greater cosmic flow. The Celts recognized that nothing existed in isolation. Every act, every choice, resonated through the web of life, creating ripples that might be felt in both seen and unseen ways. This understanding fostered a sense of respect, humility, and attentiveness that became integral to their worldview. Through these careful observations and practices, the Celts cultivated a deep attunement to the natural world, a rhythm that shaped both practical life and spiritual understanding. They learned to perceive the invisible currents flowing through rivers and forests, to hear the subtle signals of the changing seasons, and to honor the eternal cycles that governed all living things. In their myths and stories, these rhythms were woven into tales of gods, heroes, and spirits, illustrating the inseparable connection between human experience and the natural world. The sacred rhythms of nature became both teacher and companion, reminding the Celts of the mystery, continuity, and wonder inherent in the land they called home. And so, as the wind bends the grass along a quiet riverbank, and the sun casts long shadows over hills and valleys, one can imagine the Celts observing, listening, and learning from the same patterns that continue to shape the world today. The gentle pulse of nature, the turning of seasons, the flow of water, the cycle of birth and decay, forms an invisible bridge between past and present, guiding the listener softly into the next chapter of this ancient story. It is here, in the quiet intimacy of rivers, groves, and skies, that the Celtic people first learned to weave their myths, their rituals, and their reverence into the enduring fabric of the natural world. In the misty landscapes of the Celtic world, where rolling hills met dense forests and rivers whispered secrets of ages past, there emerged figures whose deeds bridged the line between history and legend. These were the heroes whose lives were etched in memory, whose stories were passed down through generations beside flickering fires, and whose presence lingered long after their footsteps had faded from the earth. Unlike the gods who inhabited the ethereal realms or the spirits that moved unseen through sacred groves, these heroes were human, yet touched by forces beyond comprehension. They acted as intermediaries between the mortal world and the mystical, embodying the struggles, courage, and wisdom of their people, while also reflecting the timeless allure of myth. One of the most celebrated figures is Cu Chulainn, a warrior whose exploits were as extraordinary as the very landscapes he traversed. From a young age, he displayed abilities that surpassed ordinary men: unparalleled strength, unyielding courage, and a keen intuition that seemed to border on the supernatural. Yet, what makes Cu Chulainn remarkable is not merely his feats of battle, but the way his life embodies the tension between human vulnerability and heroic ideal. In tales that ripple across centuries, we see him confronting impossible odds, facing foes that seem larger than life, and yet struggling with fear, sorrow, and the weight of destiny. This duality, the human within the heroic, creates a subtle tension that resonates deeply, reminding listeners that greatness often carries with it a profound cost, a quiet shadow beside the bright flame of valor. Finn Mac Cumhale, another iconic figure, presents a different dimension of heroism. Unlike the warrior Cu Chulainn, Finn is often portrayed as a leader, a thinker, and a protector of his people. His adventures are marked by a mixture of cunning and wisdom, blending martial skill with insight and diplomacy. Finn's legendary exploits, whether hunting mythical beasts or confronting supernatural challenges, are woven into the landscapes of Ireland itself, giving the land a living narrative dimension. Forests, rivers, and hills become more than mere settings. They are partners in his story, shaping and being shaped by his actions. The interplay between hero and environment, human choice and natural consequence, highlights the Celtic understanding that greatness is not an isolated force, but an interconnected part of the world around it. The heroes of Celtic myth were not always flawless or entirely admirable. Their flaws, doubts, and human limitations make them relatable, even as their extraordinary deeds elevate them beyond the ordinary. In tales of warriors, leaders, and champions, we encounter acts of courage shadowed by moments of fear, choices that bring triumph and tragedy alike, and encounters with mystical beings that test the boundaries of human understanding. This delicate balance between light and shadow, strength and vulnerability, allows listeners to immerse themselves in the story without being overwhelmed, maintaining the calm, yet curious tone essential to a sleep-friendly exploration of myth. Heroism in Celtic stories often extends beyond physical feats into moral and symbolic realms. The deeds of these figures convey lessons about honor, loyalty, and the consequences of human actions. A single choice, seemingly small, can ripple through the narrative, bringing unforeseen fortune or misfortune, echoing the subtle patterns observed in nature. This intertwining of morality, fate, and action reflects the broader worldview of the Celts, in which humans, the divine, and the natural world exist in delicate balance. Every adventure, every challenge faced by these heroes, becomes a mirror in which listeners can perceive both the strengths and vulnerabilities within themselves, connecting the past to the present through imagination and reflection. Some heroes are remembered for their extraordinary confrontations with the mystical. Cu Chulainn, for instance, faces not only human adversaries but also forces that defy rational understanding. Phantoms, enchanted weapons, and spells that test both body and spirit. Similarly, Finn's encounters with the Salmon of Knowledge or otherworldly beings reveal the hero's journey as much about acquiring wisdom as demonstrating valor. These narratives illustrate the Celtic belief that true heroism is a fusion of courage, intellect, and moral discernment, a harmonious alignment of human potential with the deeper currents of the world. The unknown, in these tales, is not merely a challenge to be conquered, but an invitation to engage with the mysteries of existence. In addition to individual figures, many heroes acted within larger groups, such as the Fianna, bands of warriors led by Finn Mac Cumhale. These groups represent the power of community, the collective strength found in loyalty, shared knowledge, and collaboration. The narratives of their adventures often emphasize cooperation and trust, showing that even extraordinary individuals thrive most when connected to others and to the rhythms of the land. The interplay between individual heroism and communal effort mirrors the dualities present in Celtic mythology. The personal and the collective, the visible and the unseen, the historical and the legendary. The landscapes themselves seem to carry the memory of these heroes. Walking along a mist-shrouded valley or beside a quietly flowing river, one can almost sense the weight of their stories, the silent echoes of battles fought, lessons learned, and victories celebrated. Forests whisper with the footsteps of the past. Hills hold the shadow of long-forgotten encounters, and stone monuments, some worn smooth by centuries of wind and rain, retain the silent testament to human striving. The contrast between the permanence of the natural world and the fleeting human experience reinforces the mystical quality of these narratives, where the boundaries of history and legend are intentionally blurred, creating a liminal space where imagination, reflection, and memory coexist. Ultimately, the heroes of Celtic myth exist in the delicate space between what is known and what is imagined. Their stories are not rigid historical accounts, nor are they purely fantastical tales. They are carefully woven tapestries of human aspiration, courage, and the encounter with the unknown. By blending fact and fiction, strength and vulnerability, the myths of these heroes offer listeners both the comfort of narrative structure and the thrill of mystery. In a gentle, meditative rhythm, these stories invite us to contemplate the qualities of bravery, the consequences of choice, and the enduring presence of wonder in a world that is at once familiar and unknowable. As night settles softly over the hills and rivers, and the wind stirs the leaves in a quiet chorus, the heroes of the Celtic past remain ever present. They do not demand attention with clashing swords or loud proclamations. Instead, they linger in the imagination, quietly teaching, guiding, and inspiring. Their stories serve as bridges between the historical and the mythical, the human and the mystical, offering a tranquil yet compelling journey into the heart of the Celtic world. It is within this delicate balance that listeners can fully immerse themselves, following the subtle trails of courage, wisdom, and wonder, prepare to step next into the mystical realms of creatures and spirits that populate the Celtic night. As dusk settles over the Celtic hills and valleys, the world seems to exhale, and the familiar forms of trees, rivers, and stone circles soften into shadowed silhouettes. In these quiet moments, when the wind whispers through the branches and the last light glints across the water, the Celtic imagination comes alive with beings that dwell between the tangible and the mystical. These creatures, often unseen yet deeply felt, are neither entirely benevolent nor entirely malevolent. They exist in the liminal spaces of the world, the darkened forest glades, the mist-shrouded rivers, and the still pools of sacred springs, blurring the boundaries between reality and legend, between the known and the unknown. The Celts perceive these beings as integral to life itself, manifestations of nature's magic and the hidden rhythms that govern existence. Among the most enchanting of these entities are the Selkies, seals that can shed their skin to walk upon the land as humans. In stories passed quietly from one generation to the next, Selkies embody longing and transformation, often representing the delicate interplay between freedom and attachment. They are gentle and elusive, appearing on misty shores at dawn, their eyes reflecting the deep, hidden wisdom of the sea. To encounter a Selkie is to glimpse the otherworldly, to sense the delicate balance between two forms of existence, land and water, human and animal, reality, and dream. These creatures serve as gentle reminders of the mysteries that lie just beyond the ordinary, waiting to be discovered with patience and reverence. Then there are the banshees, ethereal figures whose soft, haunting wails are said to foretell death. Yet, in their quiet presence, there's a strange kind of beauty, a melancholic grace that evokes reflection rather than fear. The banshee's lament is not merely a warning, but a connection to the cycle of life and death, an acknowledgement of the transient nature of human existence. Their stories, told in hushed voices around hearths or whispered through the corridors of stone-built homes, remind listeners of the delicate threads that bind life, destiny, and the unseen forces that guide the world. By framing the banshee not as a creature of terror, but as a contemplative presence, the myths maintain their quiet, meditative rhythm, offering insight into the Celtic view of mortality and reverence for what lies beyond. The Fae, or fairies, inhabit a different yet equally captivating domain. Often described as diminutive beings with luminous eyes and subtle, graceful movements, they are guardians of hidden places and keepers of arcane knowledge. The Fae are not confined to forests alone. They can appear near streams, among flowers, or even in domestic spaces, always alert, always observing. Stories of their tricks, gifts, or interventions emphasize the unpredictability of the natural and supernatural world. They remind the Celts that existence is not entirely under human control, and that respect, humility, and attentiveness are essential virtues when navigating a world alive with unseen presences. The Fae are a subtle bridge between human experience and mystical insight, reflecting the duality of wonder and caution that permeates Celtic mythology. Some creatures straddle the line between animal and spirit, embodying both the tangible and the fantastical. The puka, for example, is a shapeshifter capable of appearing as a horse, goat, or even a shadowy figure at twilight. These entities often carry ambiguous intentions, sometimes leading travelers astray or warning of hidden dangers, sometimes offering guidance or opportunity. Their presence reinforces the Celtic belief that the natural world is alive in ways that humans can scarcely comprehend, that every hill, stream, and grove contains layers of meaning and potential. The puka teaches that caution and curiosity are intertwined, and that the unknown should be approached with respect and quiet observation. These mystical beings were more than mere stories. They were woven into the fabric of everyday life. Children learned to leave small offerings at the edges of forests or along riverbanks, gifts of milk, bread, or simple crafted objects, in hopes of earning favor or protection. Farmers might pause before crossing certain meadows, honoring spirits believed to dwell there. Such acts were not only practical or ritualistic, but also reflective of a worldview in which the visible and invisible coexist in delicate harmony. The creatures of the night, therefore, served as both companions and teachers, guiding human behavior and fostering a sense of interconnectedness with a world beyond immediate perception. In some tales, these beings reveal moral or philosophical truths. The Selkie reminds us of the cost of attachment and the beauty of freedom. The Banshee illustrates the inevitability of mortality and the importance of mindfulness. The Fae reflect the unpredictability of life and the necessity of respect for forces beyond comprehension. The puka teaches humility in the face of the unknown. Through these narratives, listeners are gently invited to consider their own lives in relation to the patterns and mysteries of the world, blending reflection with the calm curiosity that characterizes the sleep-friendly retelling of myths. The environment itself amplifies the presence of these creatures. Mist rolling over hills, the shimmer of moonlight on water, or the soft rustle of leaves in an ancient grove all serve as subtle signals of the mystical. These sensory cues create an atmosphere in which imagination and perception merge, allowing the mind to wander without urgency, to contemplate without fear. The contrast between the serene, familiar landscapes and the quiet, enigmatic presences that inhabit them maintains engagement while preserving a meditative pace, drawing the listener deeper into the narrative. Even today, long after the Celts first told their stories, the echoes of these creatures remain. One can walk along a foggy riverbank or beneath a canopy of ancient oaks and feel, if only for a moment, that the world is alive with unseen observers, that the rhythms of nature conceal layers of mystery waiting to be noticed. This subtle, ever-present sense of wonder is the essence of the Celtic imagination, a world in which every sound, shadow, and movement carries meaning, where the mundane and the magical coexist in quiet equilibrium. By honoring this perspective, listeners are invited into a reflective space, a calm liminality where the night itself becomes a storyteller, weaving tales of creatures that live between what is known and what is imagined. In the gentle interplay of shadows and light, of sound and silence, the mystical creatures of the Celtic night continue to inhabit the imagination. They are reminders that the world is larger than immediate perception, that mystery persists even in places we think we understand, and that every hill, river, and forest is imbued with a quiet, enduring magic. By observing, listening, and reflecting, one can enter this liminal space alongside the ancient Celts, feeling the pulse of a land alive with wonder, and following the soft trails of myths that continue to whisper through time, guiding the mind gently toward the next chapter of love, loss, and the human heart. Amid the rolling hills, misty forests, and quiet rivers of the Celtic lands, there unfold stories that speak not only of heroes and gods, but of the tender and fragile threads of human emotion. Love, in the Celtic imagination, was rarely simple or predictable. It was a force intertwined with magic, fate, and the ever-present shadow of loss. The myths recount lovers separated by impossible odds, by transformations, or by interventions from the divine. Yet even in sorrow, these stories are steeped in beauty, teaching lessons about the depth of human feeling and the quiet resilience of the heart. They remind listeners that love, though fleeting or challenged, leaves an enduring mark upon both the human soul and the world itself. One such tale tells of Deirdre of the Sorrows, a woman whose beauty and spirit were so extraordinary that they inspired devotion, desire, and ultimately tragedy. From a moment of her birth, her fate was intertwined with prophecy, a quiet tension between the promise of love and the inevitability of heartbreak. She grew into a figure admired by all, yet her life was shadowed by warnings of sorrow, illustrating the Celtic belief that human emotions, while powerful and sacred, are often subject to forces beyond understanding. The story of Deirdre unfolds like a soft, melancholic melody, each step marked by the delicate interplay of choice, destiny, and the unseen hand of fate. Even as the narrative leads to sorrow, it is told with gentleness, inviting reflection rather than alarm, and encouraging listeners to consider the transient beauty of love and life. Similarly, the story of Niamh and Oisin reflects the intertwining of love, adventure, and separation. Niamh, a radiant figure from the otherworld, descends to Earth, offering Oisin a chance to leave his mortal life behind and journey to lands of eternal youth. Their love is passionate yet bound by the inevitability of time and mortality. Eventually, Oisin returns to the mortal world, and the magic that sustained their bond fades, leaving him to face the consequences of age and loss. The narrative conveys not only the wonder of love that transcends ordinary life, but also the quiet melancholy of impermanence. It teaches, in a reflective manner, that even the most profound connections are fragile, shaped by forces both visible and unseen, and that the memories of love endure even after it is gone. These myths often blend the human with the supernatural, emphasizing that love and loss exist within a larger tapestry of cosmic and mystical forces. Lovers may be transformed into animals, carried across time by enchanted rivers, or hidden away in remote, mystical lands. Such transformations are neither entirely cruel nor entirely kind. They exist as expressions of a universe in which beauty and sorrow coexist, where human desire brushes against the mysterious currents of fate. The stories convey that love is a powerful agent of change, capable of inspiring great courage, profound reflection, and even tragic sacrifice. They evoke a sense of quiet awe, reminding the listener that emotion itself can be a conduit to the unknown, a bridge between the ordinary and the magical. The Celts also told stories in which unfulfilled or forbidden love carried lessons about restraint, respect, and the consequences of human choices. Relationships tested by jealousy, social boundaries, or divine interference illustrate that love is not merely personal. It is bound up with ethics, morality, and the subtle rules of the world. In these narratives, sorrow is not a punishment but a mirror, reflecting the delicate balance required to navigate life with both compassion and mindfulness. The emotional depth of these stories provides a rhythm of reflection, a gentle cadence that aligns with the meditative tone suited for bedtime listening. Even moments of heartbreak become spaces for quiet contemplation, offering listeners an opportunity to absorb the gentle lessons embedded in myth. Animals and natural elements often play symbolic roles in these love stories. A swan might embody transformation and fidelity. A river may separate or unite lovers, and a grove of trees might serve as a hidden meeting place or a sanctuary. These elements reinforce the connection between human emotion and the natural world, echoing the broader Celtic worldview, in which all life is interconnected. In this way, love and loss are not merely human experiences, but reflections of the larger rhythms of nature, the subtle patterns of the universe, and the enduring presence of the mystical. The listener, guided by this imagery, can drift gently through landscapes that are both physical and emotional, observing the quiet power of love in its many forms. Even in tales of sorrow, the storytelling maintains a calm, reflective tone. The myths invite the listener to linger in the emotional spaces they create, to consider the depth of connection and the impermanence of attachment without fear or agitation. By framing love and loss as both magical and instructive, the narratives cultivate empathy and introspection, allowing the mind to wander gently along the currents of story while remaining soothed by the rhythm of narration. The contrast between human tenderness and the inexorable forces of fate sustains curiosity, while the soft cadence ensures the experience remains immersive and sleep-friendly. Ultimately, the legends of love and loss in the Celtic tradition reveal the profound interweaving of human experience with the mystical world. They remind listeners that emotion is both fragile and enduring, capable of illuminating the beauty of existence even amid sorrow. These myths encourage quiet reflection, a gentle awareness of the passage of time, and a deep appreciation for the unseen forces that shape lives and hearts alike. In the whispering of winds through ancient forests, the ripple of rivers, and the soft glow of twilight over rolling hills, one can feel the lingering presence of these stories, carrying lessons, reflections, and the enduring magic of love's triumphs and heartbreaks. And as the night deepens, shadows stretch across valleys and hills. The subtle hum of nocturnal life fills the air, and the listener is left in a meditative space, ready to drift toward the next chapter of Celtic myth, the portals and thresholds that connect the ordinary world with realms of magic and mystery. The stories of love and loss, tender yet powerful, form a bridge to the next unfolding of the narrative, where the mystical and the human continue to intertwine, and where the calm, reflective journey through Celtic legend continues to guide the imagination gently onward.
In the quiet landscapes of the Celtic lands, certain places held a subtle, almost imperceptible energy, as if the veil between the human world and the mystical realms was thinner there than elsewhere. Ancient mounds, stone circles, winding rivers, and hidden groves were believed to be portals, thresholds through which the ordinary and the extraordinary intertwined. The Celts perceived these spaces not simply as locations but as living conduits, where the energy of the land, the presence of spirits, and the patterns of nature converged in gentle, quiet resonance. These portals were rarely marked by grand structures or loud ceremonies. Their power was woven into the natural fabric, discovered by those attuned to the subtle signals of the world, such as the shift of light, the sound of running water, or the quiet hum of wind through the trees. Standing stones, scattered across valleys and atop hills, are among the most enduring markers of these thresholds. Worn smooth by centuries of wind and rain, their surfaces retain the quiet presence of rituals long forgotten. Each stone seems to hum with memory, as if holding traces of chants, footsteps, and whispered prayers from generations past. Some stones align with the sun or moon at certain times of the year, creating natural phenomena that transform ordinary light into ethereal displays. The interplay between the enduring permanence of stone and the fleeting moments of natural alignment reflects the Celtic understanding that the sacred is embedded in both structure and time, a quiet balance of human perception and cosmic rhythm. Mounds, often referred to as burial or ceremonial sites, were also viewed as liminal spaces. Some are simple earthen rises, others conceal chambers within which the dead were laid to rest or rituals performed. These mounds were believed to connect the living with the ancestors, offering a gentle passage through which the spirit of a person could move between the realms. Walking near a mound, one might feel an almost imperceptible shift in the air, a subtle sense that the ordinary world has softened at the edges, creating a bridge between here and somewhere beyond. The Celts understood that such spaces were not to be disturbed lightly. They were sacred thresholds that required respect, mindfulness, and quiet observation, inviting contemplation of life, death, and the mysteries in between. Rivers and streams, too, were considered natural portals, flowing between the visible and invisible worlds. Some were said to carry messages from the other world, while others served as paths along which mystical beings might travel unseen. The gentle rush of water over stones, the glint of sunlight on ripples, and the soft sounds of movement beneath the surface all created an environment in which imagination could wander freely. Crossing such a river, whether physically or within the mind, was a symbolic journey, a quiet passage into realms that challenge understanding and expand perception. The water, alive with motion and reflection, becomes both guide and mirror, showing that the boundary between worlds is not absolute but permeable and dynamic. Forests and groves often conceal portals in subtler ways. Hidden clearings, shaded paths, and clusters of ancient trees were considered spaces where spirits might linger, where offerings could be left, and where visions could arise. These were not spaces of overt spectacle but of gentle perception, requiring attunement and a soft awareness of the rhythms of life around them. The rustle of leaves, the distant call of a bird, or the subtle shift of sunlight through the canopy could all signal the presence of a threshold, a reminder that the mystical is embedded within the natural world. In such quiet attentiveness, the Celts found both guidance and inspiration, allowing the ordinary to merge with the extraordinary in a seamless and reflective experience. These portals, whether marked by stone, mound, river, or grove, share a common theme. They invite contemplation, respect, and patience. They are not gateways in the sense of immediate transportation or spectacle, but rather subtle spaces in which perception shifts, where the mind and heart become more open to the unseen and unknown. They remind us that the world is layered, that the boundaries we perceive are not always as fixed as they seem, and that the mystical can be found not only in grand displays but in the quiet, measured rhythms of nature itself. As the night deepens over the hills, and shadows stretch softly across rivers and forests, one can imagine the presence of these portals, faintly humming in the twilight. They are spaces where the human experience meets the unseen, where curiosity and reverence intertwine, and where the imagination can drift gently, aware of mysteries that exist beyond the visible. The portals between worlds are a reminder that in the Celtic mindset, life itself is a journey through layered realities, where observation, respect, and quiet reflection allow the boundaries between the known and unknown to dissolve, even if only for a fleeting moment. In this calm, meditative space, the listener is invited to linger, to imagine the soft ripple of water, the rustle of leaves, and the silent presence of ancient stones. The portals between worlds are not only physical markers but invitations to explore the subtle mysteries that surround everyday life, creating a gentle bridge toward the deeper, more enigmatic teachings of the druids, whose wisdom and rituals will unfold in the next chapter of this journey through the Celtic world.
In the heart of the Celtic world, amidst ancient forests, sacred groves, and misty hills, there lived a class of individuals whose presence shaped both the spiritual and cultural landscape, the druids. These enigmatic figures were revered as priests, philosophers, healers, and intermediaries between the human world and the realms of the divine. They held knowledge that bridged the ordinary and extraordinary, understanding the cycles of nature, the rhythms of the seasons, and the subtleties of both human and mystical behavior. Yet, much about them remains shrouded in mystery, as few written records survive. What we know of them is largely drawn from oral traditions, archaeological evidence, and the echoes of myths passed down through generations. This veil of secrecy only heightens their allure, painting them as guardians of hidden wisdom, whose very existence was intertwined with the natural and supernatural landscapes of the Celtic lands. The druids were deeply attuned to the sacred rhythms of the world, interpreting the movement of the sun and moon, the growth of plants, and the behavior of animals to understand the hidden currents that influence life. They were mediators, bridging the human and divine, and guiding their communities in matters both practical and spiritual. It is said that their knowledge encompassed not only rituals and ceremonies, but also law, philosophy, and history. They were storytellers and keepers of tradition, transmitting vital lessons through parables, poetry, and ritual performance. Their wisdom was never rigid. It was adaptable, alive, and responsive to the shifting cycles of nature and the complexities of human society. Rituals conducted by druids often took place in groves, beside rivers, or atop hills, emphasizing the intrinsic connection between their practices and the natural world. Fires would be lit to mark solstices, moons, and seasonal transitions, casting soft glows upon the faces of participants and creating a rhythm of light and shadow that mirrored the balance of life and spirit. These ceremonies were not merely spectacles. They were acts of attunement, helping communities align themselves with the unseen forces that shape their lives. The contrast between the human and divine, the mundane and the mystical, was at the core of Druidic practice, offering participants a sense of guidance and grounding while nurturing a connection to the larger patterns of existence. Druids also served as healers, employing herbs, chants, and rituals to restore balance to both body and spirit. Their knowledge of plants was vast, understanding the medicinal properties of leaves, roots, and flowers, as well as their symbolic significance. Healing was as much a spiritual process as a physical one, reflecting the Celtic belief that health is inseparable from harmony with nature, community, and the unseen world. In quiet moments beside a river or in the shadow of a grove, a druid might prepare remedies or offer counsel, their presence calm, deliberate, and deeply attuned to the rhythms of life. This gentle wisdom, passed through observation and experience, allowed the Celts to live in subtle alignment with the cycles of nature, fostering resilience, insight, and a profound sense of interconnectedness. Storytelling was another essential aspect of Druidic life. Through tales of gods, heroes, and mystical creatures, Druids conveyed ethical guidance, historical memory, and spiritual insight. They understood the power of narrative to shape perception, embed moral lessons, and maintain cultural cohesion. A story told beside a fire, under the stars, or in a sacred grove was more than entertainment. It was a vessel for knowledge, connecting the listener to the continuum of generations and to the hidden dimensions of existence. In this way, the Druid functioned as both teacher and guardian, guiding others toward understanding the delicate interplay between the visible and invisible, the human and divine. Yet, the Druids were not only concerned with abstract wisdom or ceremonial practice. They played active roles in the social and political life of Celtic communities. They advised kings and chieftains, mediated disputes, and offered counsel in times of crisis. Their authority was respected not through coercion, but through demonstrated insight, ethical integrity, and a profound understanding of both human nature and the natural world. This blend of spiritual, practical, and philosophical expertise reinforced their central position within Celtic society, creating a bridge between the everyday and the mystical, the ordinary and the transcendent. Despite their prominence, much about Druids remains deliberately veiled in secrecy. They were traditionally forbidden to write down their teachings, relying instead on oral transmission and memorization. This practice ensured that knowledge was not easily fragmented or misused and maintained the sacredness of their wisdom. The act of learning from a druid was itself a form of attunement, requiring patience, observation, and careful listening. The absence of written records has contributed to the aura of mystery that surrounds them today, inviting modern imaginations to wander through possibilities, to consider what was known, what was hidden, and what might have been lost to time. The Druidic understanding of life was profoundly holistic. They recognized the interdependence of all things, humans, animals, plants, and spirits. Every ritual, story, and act of healing was embedded within this awareness, reinforcing the interconnectedness of existence. By fostering respect for natural cycles, ethical behavior, and mystical awareness, Druids shaped a worldview in which the unseen forces of the universe were acknowledged, honored, and harmonized with human life. Their teachings encouraged reflection, mindfulness, and attunement, qualities that continue to resonate with those who seek both calm and curiosity in the retelling of Celtic myth. As night falls softly over hills, forests, and rivers, one can imagine Druids walking quietly through groves, observing the alignment of stars, listening to the murmurs of streams, and sensing the subtle shifts of wind and light. Their presence is both grounding and inspiring, a reminder that wisdom, reverence, and gentle attentiveness are enduring pathways to understanding the world and its mysteries. The enigmatic Druids, with their blend of knowledge, ritual, and insight, form a natural bridge to the next chapter in the Celtic story. The ways in which ordinary humans, heroes, and mystical forces interact, shaping legends, love, and life in ways that are at once subtle and profound. In the Celtic myths, heroes were often defined not only by their feats of strength or skill, but by the trials and challenges that tested their spirit, judgment, and resilience. These trials were rarely straightforward. They were subtle, layered, and often intertwined with the mysterious rhythms of the natural and mystical world. A hero's journey was as much about navigating internal conflicts and moral dilemmas as it was about confronting external enemies or supernatural obstacles. The Celts understood that true heroism emerges not from the absence of fear or failure, but from the quiet courage to face adversity, to reflect, and to grow through the process. These narratives, therefore, blend excitement with meditation, allowing listeners to drift into a reflective state while remaining engaged with the unfolding story. Cuchulainn, one of the most celebrated Celtic heroes, embodies this principle vividly. From his earliest days, he faced tests that measured both his prowess and his ethical discernment. His encounters with formidable warriors, magical weapons, and complex social expectations demanded more than mere physical strength. They required wisdom, restraint, and an understanding of the consequences of his actions. Each challenge he met offered a lesson, a reflection on courage, loyalty, and the fine balance between destiny and choice. The myths convey that heroism is rarely uncomplicated. It is threaded with moral ambiguity and the weight of responsibility, reminding listeners that even legendary figures are bound by the consequences of their decisions. Other heroes, such as Finn Mac-Cumhaill, faced trials that blended the ordinary and the extraordinary. Hunting mythical beasts, solving riddles, or navigating enchanted landscapes required keen observation, adaptability, and subtle intuition. These challenges emphasize the importance of aligning one's actions with natural rhythms and mystical guidance. Unlike modern tales of heroism, which often highlight instant victory, Celtic myths dwell on the slow, deliberate process of learning through experience. Each obstacle is a lesson, each encounter an opportunity to deepen one's understanding of both the human and the hidden worlds. In this way, the narrative encourages a meditative engagement, allowing the listener to appreciate the nuanced, layered dimensions of heroism. The trials were not always solitary. Heroes often relied on companions, mentors, or mystical allies to navigate their challenges. The Fianna, the band of warriors led by Finn, exemplify this collective approach. Each member brought unique skills, insight, and wisdom, creating a dynamic interplay between individual talent and communal effort. The stories emphasize that challenges are not simply obstacles to be overcome alone. They're invitations to cooperation, trust, and the recognition that human strength is often amplified when shared. This subtle theme of interdependence mirrors the larger Celtic worldview, in which humans, nature, and the mystical coexist in a delicate balance. Some trials took a symbolic form, testing the hero's emotional or ethical boundaries. Love, loyalty, and honor could become as challenging to navigate as a battle with a supernatural foe. Heroes might confront choices that demanded sacrifice, patience, or the tempering of personal desire for the greater good. These narratives encourage reflection on the complexity of human emotion, the weight of responsibility, and the interplay between desire and duty. The quiet tension created by these moral and emotional trials keeps the listener engaged, while the calm, poetic cadence of storytelling maintains a meditative, sleep-friendly atmosphere. Mythical creatures often served as both obstacles and teachers. A hero might encounter a shape-shifting puka, a river spirit, or a guardian of an enchanted forest. These encounters were not simply confrontations. They were exercises in perception, intuition, and understanding the unknown. Success depended not only on physical action, but also on respect, patience, and alignment with the rhythms of nature and magic. In this way, challenges reinforce the central Celtic theme that the world is alive with forces that must be acknowledged, honored, and harmonized with, rather than dominated or feared. The interplay between the known and unknown, the visible and invisible, sustains both curiosity and calm reflection, inviting the listener to explore these subtle lessons alongside the hero. Seasonal cycles, natural phenomena, and sacred sites also shaped the trials heroes faced. A journey might require navigating a river during a full moon, entering a grove at dawn, or performing a ritual at the precise time of a solstice. These elements reinforce the interconnectedness of human action, natural forces, and mystical currents. They emphasize that courage and skill alone are insufficient. Awareness, attentiveness, and harmony with larger patterns are equally essential. By embedding challenges within the natural and supernatural landscapes, the myths create a layered sense of reality that mirrors the Celtic understanding of existence itself, a world alive with rhythms, mysteries, and opportunities for insight. Even failure held meaning in these tales. A hero who faltered was not merely a cautionary example, but a figure through whom listeners could explore the consequences of choice, the limits of understanding, and the transformative power of reflection. Setbacks often led to growth, insight, and the eventual attainment of wisdom that could not have been gained through unchallenged success. This emphasis on learning from difficulty creates a gentle, reassuring cadence within the stories, encouraging listeners to reflect on their own experiences with patience and empathy, while remaining immersed in the poetic landscape of Celtic myth. Ultimately, the trials and challenges of Celtic heroes are not just exciting adventures. They are meditative journeys through courage, ethics, and the subtle mysteries of the world. They reveal that heroism is not merely about physical strength or triumph over enemies, but about alignment with deeper rhythms, thoughtful decision-making, and the capacity to navigate both seen and unseen forces. Each challenge, whether external or internal, invites reflection, compassion, and an understanding of the interconnectedness of life, creating a narrative rhythm that soothes the mind while sustaining curiosity. As night falls softly over the Celtic hills, rivers, and forests, one can imagine heroes walking quietly along misted paths, their minds and hearts tested by challenges both ordinary and extraordinary. Their journeys are echoed in the rustle of leaves, the soft murmur of streams, and the distant calls of nocturnal creatures. Through their trials, they leave a quiet, enduring imprint upon the land and imagination, offering listeners a sense of wonder, reflection, and gentle inspiration. The challenges faced by heroes provide a bridge to the next chapter, where love, sorrow, and human experience continue to intertwine with the mystical and the unknown, carrying the audience deeper into the calm, immersive world of Celtic myth. In the Celtic world, objects were rarely considered merely utilitarian. They were imbued with layers of meaning, power, and symbolism. Every crafted item, from a simple comb to an elaborately decorated sword, held significance beyond its immediate function. These objects were often treated as conduits, connecting the physical and spiritual realms, and serving as anchors for memory, ritual, and myth. The Celts believed that certain items could hold the essence of the natural world, the favor of the divine, or the wisdom of ancestors. Symbols carved into stones, metalwork, or would serve as reminders of cosmic principles, moral lessons, and the subtle patterns underlying existence. In this quiet, reflective understanding, everyday life and mythic imagination intertwined seamlessly, creating a world alive with meaning and attentive awareness. One of the most evocative examples of sacred objects is the cauldron, often appearing in myth as a vessel of transformation, abundance, and knowledge. The cauldron symbolizes both sustenance and mystical power, capable of replenishing life or imparting wisdom to those deemed worthy. Tales of enchanted cauldrons recount their ability to heal, nourish, or even resurrect, highlighting the belief that objects can serve as bridges between the human and divine. These narratives encourage reflection on the subtle energies that permeate everyday life and underscore the Celtic appreciation for objects as carriers of story, memory, and cosmic alignment. The cauldron, in particular, becomes a metaphorical center of balance, reminding listeners that transformation often occurs quietly, beneath the surface, in rhythm with natural and spiritual cycles. Swords and weapons, too, carry profound symbolic weight. They were not mere instruments of war. They were extensions of the hero's identity, often reflecting virtue, destiny, and moral responsibility. A sword might be imbued with magical properties, its appearance and actions signaling approval or warning. The careful crafting, engraving, and ceremonial use of a weapon underscored its significance, elevating it from a tool to a sacred symbol of protection, honor, and courage. In myths, the hero's interaction with such objects often mirrors inner growth, ethical discernment, and alignment with broader cosmic patterns, teaching that power carries responsibility and that mastery requires wisdom as well as skill. Jewelry and personal adornments also held meaning, often marking status, allegiance, or connection to the mystical. Torques, rings, and pendants were not mere decorations. They were expressions of identity, belief, and relationship with the divine. Crafted with intricate designs, these items often incorporated symbols such as spirals, knots, and animal motifs, each carrying layers of interpretation. Spirals, for example, might represent the eternal cycles of life and death, while knots signified interconnectedness and continuity. Animals, carved or embossed on jewelry, echoed traits admired or revered: strength, cunning, wisdom, or grace. Wearing such objects was a daily act of attunement, a quiet acknowledgement of the patterns and principles that governed life, nature, and the mystical realms. Stones, too, were vital in the Celtic symbolic landscape. Standing stones, carved with subtle markings, were often placed at liminal spaces, river crossings, hilltops, or sacred groves, serving as markers of threshold and remembrance. Some stones bear patterns that align with celestial movements, echoing the intricate understanding of astronomy and cosmology possessed by the druids and artisans of the time. Each stone, whether simple or elaborately carved, carried memory, guidance, and quiet power, reminding the observer of the subtle forces shaping existence. The act of encountering a sacred stone, even in silence, became an opportunity for reflection, meditation, and attunement to the rhythms of the land and cosmos. Colors, patterns, and inscriptions added further layers to the symbolic language of objects. Red might evoke life, vitality, or divine favor. Blue could symbolize water, sky, or the mystical. Intricate spirals and knots reinforce the idea of continuity and interconnectedness. These symbols were more than decoration. They were a language, a quiet communication between maker, wearer, and observer, carrying lessons, warnings, or blessings across generations. The interplay of design, material, and placement created an immersive experience, inviting contemplation, mindfulness, and the gentle wonder that characterizes the Celtic worldview. Even ordinary tools and household items were touched with reverence and symbolic significance. Bowls, combs, and weaving implements might be used in ritual, decorated with patterns, or passed down as family heirlooms, carrying both practical and spiritual resonance. These objects remind us that the sacred need not be distant or grand. It can be present in daily life, quietly guiding perception, action, and reflection. The Celts cultivated attentiveness to the objects that surrounded them, recognizing that meaning and mystery can inhabit the familiar and that the mundane is often intertwined with the magical. Through these sacred objects and symbols, the Celts created a world in which every material item was potentially a bridge between the visible and unseen, the temporal and eternal. They invited reflection, respect, and imagination, encouraging individuals to see beyond appearances and attune to subtle patterns of life, nature, and spirit. The interplay of utility, artistry, and sacred meaning fostered an environment in which myth, ritual, and daily existence could coexist harmoniously, enhancing both perception and experience. As the night deepens, shadows fall across the hills, rivers glimmer softly under moonlight, and the listener can imagine the quiet presence of these sacred objects in the homes, groves, and sacred sites of ancient Celtic communities. Each item, from a carved stone to a polished cauldron, tells a story of human creativity, spiritual insight, and attunement to the rhythms of the world. In this gentle, immersive space, the listener is invited to pause, reflect, and feel the subtle pulse of a culture in which the material and mystical coexisted in quiet harmony, a harmony that resonates with the next chapter of myth, adventure, and discovery in the Celtic tradition.
Within the quiet forests, misty rivers, and rolling hills of the Celtic lands, there exists a subtle yet compelling current of stories dedicated to tricksters, figures whose cleverness, cunning, and mischievous nature reveal deeper truths about the world. These tales, often infused with gentle humor, curiosity, and unexpected lessons, illustrate the delicate balance between knowledge and folly, chaos and order, human ambition and the guidance of unseen forces. Tricksters are not merely pranksters, they are teachers, guardians, and guides who challenge assumptions and encourage reflection. Their stories captivate the imagination, inviting listeners to explore the interplay between intelligence, morality, and the hidden patterns that govern life. Through their actions, we see that wisdom is often born of observation, creativity, and a willingness to engage with uncertainty. One of the most prominent trickster figures in Celtic mythology is the shapeshifter known as Luff. Celebrated for his mastery of multiple skills, Luff embodies the principle of adaptability. His stories often highlight the value of clever thinking, the ability to solve problems in unexpected ways, and the importance of versatility in navigating a complex world. Luff's interventions in battles, feasts, and journeys are rarely straightforward. They blend strategy with improvisation, forcing both mortals and gods to reconsider assumptions and expectations. In these narratives, cleverness becomes a form of insight, a quiet demonstration of how intelligence, awareness, and flexibility can navigate both mundane challenges and mystical encounters. Another iconic figure is the trickster god Bran, whose playful and sometimes unpredictable actions illustrate the duality of wisdom and mischief. Bran's exploits often involve clever manipulations, tests of perception, and subtle guidance for those around him. Though his tricks may initially seem disruptive or confusing, they invariably lead to insight, growth, or revelation. This narrative structure reflects a broader Celtic philosophy, that learning is not linear, and that lessons often arrive through unexpected experiences. By presenting wisdom alongside humor and mischief, these stories maintain a gentle, reflective rhythm, allowing listeners to engage deeply without tension or urgency. Tricksters are often closely connected to the natural world, revealing the hidden intelligence embedded within landscapes, animals, and elements. They may use rivers to mislead, forests to conceal, or animals to teach lessons about perception, patience, and observation. A fox might serve as a guide or a warning. A crow might carry messages from the unseen world. In this way, the tales subtly communicate that understanding the natural environment requires attentiveness, humility, and an openness to unexpected revelations. The trickster becomes both a mirror and a bridge, reflecting human tendencies while guiding toward deeper awareness of the rhythms and mysteries of life. These narratives also explore the tension between human intention and unforeseen consequences. A trickster's clever action might backfire, teaching humility, caution, or the limits of perception. Such outcomes underscore the delicate balance between ingenuity and responsibility, illustrating that wisdom involves not only intelligence but also ethical awareness and the capacity to reflect on one's actions. By blending humor with consequence, the stories offer a calm yet stimulating engagement, encouraging listeners to consider how creativity, observation, and ethical discernment intertwine in the navigation of everyday life. In addition to teaching, tricksters serve as preservers of cultural memory. They transmit knowledge, stories, and moral guidance, often in indirect or playful ways. Through riddles, pranks, or subtle interventions, they ensure that lessons are remembered, internalized, and adapted to changing circumstances. This approach emphasizes that learning need not be rigid or formal. Insight can arise from observation, curiosity, and playful engagement with the world. Listeners, guided by these narratives, are encouraged to observe quietly, think creatively, and embrace the subtle currents of understanding that flow through both human and mystical realms. The cleverness of tricksters also highlights the value of flexibility in perception. Many tales involve disguises, hidden identities, and transformations, reminding the listener that reality is often layered, and that appearances can be deceiving. A hero or mortal may believe they understand a situation, only to discover that the trickster has revealed a deeper truth. These stories cultivate awareness, encouraging reflection and attentiveness, while reinforcing the central Celtic idea that wisdom requires humility, observation, and a willingness to see beyond the obvious. The gentle tension created by uncertainty and revelation maintains engagement without disturbing the calm, reflective tone suitable for bedtime listening. Animals frequently play pivotal roles in trickster stories, embodying qualities admired or cautioned against. A cunning wolf, a playful otter, or a clever raven may act as messenger, guide, or foil, their actions highlighting both human strengths and limitations. By observing the patterns and behaviors of these creatures, listeners are invited to consider the interconnectedness of all life and the subtle ways in which nature communicates guidance, warning, or insight. The trickster, in these contexts, is a mediator between human understanding and the intricate intelligence of the natural world, blending humor, insight, and quiet instruction. Even seemingly small or playful interventions carry profound symbolic weight. A trickster may rearrange objects, redirect a traveler, or create a minor confusion, only to illuminate a larger truth about patience, perception, or moral awareness. These gentle disruptions mirror the rhythms of the world, in which change, unpredictability, and subtle guidance coexist. By engaging with these narratives, listeners experience the quiet unfolding of wisdom, learning to appreciate the balance of order and chaos, light and shadow, the known and the hidden. Ultimately, the tales of tricksters reveal that wisdom is often playful, elusive, and intertwined with the unseen currents of life. They demonstrate that understanding emerges not only from direct instruction, but from engagement with mystery, observation of natural patterns, and reflection on consequences. These narratives cultivate patience, curiosity, and a meditative awareness, inviting listeners to journey gently through the landscape of Celtic myth while absorbing lessons in a calm and immersive rhythm. As the night deepens, and mist drifts softly over hills and rivers, one can imagine tricksters moving quietly through forests, reshaping perceptions, and leaving subtle lessons in their wake. They remind the listener that the world is alive with intelligence, humor, and guidance, waiting to be perceived with attentiveness and care. The gentle rhythm of these stories prepares the mind to transition smoothly to the next chapter, where themes of fate, destiny, and the unseen forces of the Celtic world unfold in quiet, reflective continuity. In the quiet, mist-covered landscapes of the Celtic world, the future was not left to chance. The Celts believed that the threads of destiny, while complex and often veiled, could be glimpsed through signs, portents, and the careful observation of natural and mystical phenomena. Prophecies and omens were treated with respect, serving as gentle guidance rather than instruments of fear. They illuminated the rhythm of time, the flow of events, and the subtle influence of unseen forces upon human lives. In this understanding, the ordinary world and the mystical realm were deeply intertwined. The turning of a leaf, the flight of a bird, or the pattern of stars in the night sky could carry insight into what was yet to come. Seers, often closely associated with druids, played a vital role in interpreting these signs. Their perception, cultivated through patience, observation, and attunement to both natural and supernatural patterns, allowed them to offer guidance for individuals and communities alike. Unlike the dramatic visions of later traditions, Celtic prophecy was often quiet, reflective, and symbolic, revealing itself through metaphor, story, or subtle environmental cues. A ripple across a still pond, the sudden cry of an owl, or a cloud drifting across a hilltop could carry meaning when perceived with attentiveness and respect. In this way, prophecy was less a rigid prediction and more a delicate dialogue with the rhythms of life, inviting reflection and mindfulness rather than alarm. One of the most intriguing aspects of Celtic prophecy is its focus on interconnectedness. Omens were rarely confined to the human realm. They often involved interactions between people, animals, weather patterns, and mystical forces. A storm on the horizon might coincide with political upheaval, or the sudden migration of birds could signal a change in fortune. These observations were interpreted through the lens of wisdom and intuition, rather than fear, emphasizing the subtle ways in which the seen and unseen worlds interact. Prophecy thus became a form of quiet guidance, encouraging harmony with natural cycles and careful consideration of actions. Mythological narratives frequently include prophetic elements that guide heroes, kings, and communities through trials and transitions. The birth of Deirdre of the Sorrows, for example, was accompanied by prophecy, shaping her destiny and the choices of those around her. The story illustrates how foreknowledge is not simply a gift or a curse. It is a lens through which human decisions, moral responsibility, and the influence of unseen forces are intertwined. Prophecy in this context serves as a narrative tool, highlighting the tension between fate and free will, while maintaining a contemplative rhythm suitable for reflection and immersive listening. Omens often arrived in symbolic forms, requiring interpretation and discernment. Animals, weather, and celestial movements were common carriers of signs. A raven might foretell transformation, a rainbow the resolution of conflict, or a sudden wind the arrival of change. These subtle signals demanded attentiveness and humility from the observer, emphasizing that wisdom comes not from force or certainty but from quiet perception and reflection. The process of noticing, interpreting, and responding to omens encouraged a meditative awareness of the world, a theme that resonates throughout Celtic myth and continues to engage listeners in a calm, immersive manner. Dreams, too, were considered a potent source of prophetic insight. The boundary between waking and sleeping, conscious thought and subconscious perception, was seen as permeable, allowing messages from the mystical realm to filter into human awareness. Dreams often contained symbols, metaphors, or narratives that required careful reflection to understand, offering guidance, warnings, or encouragement. These nocturnal visions aligned with the Celtic understanding that time and reality are not rigidly linear, and that insight can emerge from states of observation, contemplation, and receptivity. In the quiet of night, the listener can imagine the subtle rhythms of dreams carrying wisdom, bridging the ordinary and the extraordinary. The rhythm of prophecy was also closely tied to seasonal cycles and celestial movements. The turning of the solstices and equinoxes, the phases of the moon, and the position of stars were observed meticulously, forming a framework through which omens and predictions could be understood. These celestial patterns reinforced the interconnection between the heavens, the earth, and human affairs, creating a sense of alignment and continuity. By paying attention to these rhythms, the Celts cultivated a perception attuned to both subtlety and the grandeur of the cosmos, reflecting a world where insight and wonder coexist gently. Even in times of uncertainty, prophecies and omens provided a calm, guiding presence. They were not demands or imperatives but invitations to consider, observe, and reflect. Whether advising a king, guiding a hero, or providing counsel to a family, these signs offered a framework for decision-making rooted in attunement and awareness. In this way, prophecy became a quiet, immersive narrative tool, connecting listeners with the cyclical, layered, and interwoven patterns of life, nature, and mystical influence. Ultimately, prophecies and omens in the Celtic tradition reveal a worldview in which the future is not a rigidly fixed outcome, but a dynamic interplay of choice, observation, and influence. They remind listeners that attention, reflection, and receptivity are essential to understanding the rhythms of life and the subtle messages embedded in the world. As the night deepens over hills, forests, and rivers, one can imagine the gentle presence of these signs, whispering through wind, water, and shadow, inviting quiet contemplation and gentle curiosity. In this calm, meditative space, the listener is prepared to transition to the next chapter, where the interplay of fate, human courage, and mystical forces continues to unfold through the stories of legendary battles, alliances, and challenges that shaped the Celtic imagination. The prophecies and omens offer a bridge between reflection and action, mystery and understanding, sustaining the immersive rhythm of the Celtic narrative. The Celtic lands, draped in mist and framed by rolling hills, forests, and rivers, were more than just beautiful landscapes. They were sacred stages for the legendary battles that shaped myth and memory. These conflicts were not mere displays of violence. They were infused with meaning, ritual, and the profound interplay between human courage, destiny, and mystical forces. Heroes, kings, and warriors moved across lands already imbued with history and symbolism, aware that every step upon the earth resonated with layers of ancestral memory and cosmic significance. In Celtic myth, the battle was both an outer contest of skill and strategy and an inner journey of ethical choice, courage, and reflection. The quiet rhythm of these stories allows listeners to imagine the clash of forces while remaining immersed in the meditative cadence of mythic storytelling. Many of these battles were fought over sacred spaces, hilltops, rivers, or groves that held spiritual and mystical importance. The Celts believed that these sites were infused with energy, blessings, and the presence of ancestors, making them arenas where human action intersected with the unseen. Engaging in battle on such lands was not merely a tactical choice but a recognition of the sacred dimension of place. Every movement, strike, or strategy carried with it ethical and spiritual resonance. The stories convey that the outcome of these battles often depended not only on strength or skill but on insight, alignment with natural and mystical patterns, and the wisdom to act with both courage and restraint. One such legendary confrontation is the Battle of Tuatha Dé Danann, a narrative rich with symbolism, heroism, and divine intervention. This myth recounts the struggle between the Tuatha Dé Danann, a race of supernatural beings, and the Fomorians, ancient forces representing chaos and disruption. The battle unfolds across sacred lands, where rivers, hills, and mounds bear witness to both human and mystical engagement. The narrative emphasizes strategy, courage, and the intricate weaving of fate, showing that heroism requires discernment, patience, and alignment with the larger rhythms of life. Even in conflict, the story is told with a reflective, measured pace, allowing listeners to appreciate both the grandeur of the event and its subtle lessons. Warriors themselves were often depicted with symbolic significance, representing virtues, moral dilemmas, and the tensions inherent in courage and leadership. Figures like Siu Chuluin and Fionn Mac Cummill face challenges not only from opposing forces but from the ethical and emotional trials of battle. Their stories explore loyalty, honor, sacrifice, and the consequences of choices, creating a rich tapestry of narrative that balances action with introspection. In these myths, every engagement, victory, or loss is an opportunity to explore human complexity, resilience, and the interaction between fate, skill, and moral insight. Sacred lands themselves often influence the outcomes of these battles. Certain mounds, rivers, or stone alignments were believed to hold protective power, blessings, or mystical influence. Leaders and warriors were attentive to the positioning of such sites, incorporating their presence into strategy and ritual. The Celts understood that the natural and supernatural world were inseparably linked. The landscape was not a passive backdrop but an active participant in human events. By situating battles within these sacred spaces, myths communicate that courage and skill are interwoven with respect, awareness, and harmony with forces larger than oneself. The rituals associated with these conflicts were often subtle yet deeply meaningful. Offerings might be made to the spirits of the land, prayers whispered to ancestors, or ceremonial acts performed before engagement. Such practices underscore the Celtic recognition that action carries spiritual consequences, and that mindfulness and reverence can guide outcomes in both seen and unseen realms. Through these quiet acts, warriors acknowledge the sacredness of their environment, the presence of divine forces, and the delicate balance between ambition, courage, and moral responsibility. The rhythm of these narratives encourages calm reflection even amidst the depiction of battle, sustaining a meditative and immersive listening experience. Some stories emphasize the strategic use of natural phenomena during battles, fog rolling across valleys, the flow of rivers, or the positioning of sunlight at dawn. These elements were interpreted as both tactical advantage and mystical sign, revealing how closely the Celts observed and respected the world around them. The interplay between human ingenuity and the subtle guidance of natural forces highlights a recurring theme, that wisdom and attentiveness are as vital as strength and skill. Even the environment itself participates in shaping outcomes, reinforcing the holistic, interconnected worldview that permeates Celtic mythology. Legends of battles also explore the consequences of hubris, rash decisions, and misaligned intentions. Heroes who failed to heed omens, respect sacred sites, or act with mindfulness often faced unexpected challenges or loss. These narratives reinforce the gentle moral cadence of Celtic storytelling. Courage and heroism are inseparable from awareness, ethical reflection, and humility before the larger patterns of life. The consequences of action, carefully intertwined with lessons in wisdom, provide a rhythm that is both engaging and contemplative, inviting listeners to consider the deeper dimensions of conflict, courage, and choice. In addition to human and mystical forces, symbolic creatures and artifacts often influenced battles. Magical weapons, enchanted shields, and protective amulets could alter outcomes, while extraordinary animals, ravens, wolves, or supernatural beings, acted as guides, omens, or agents of transformation. These elements further blur the line between reality and the mystical, embedding each confrontation within a network of interdependent forces. The presence of such artifacts and beings reinforces the idea that the Celtic world is alive with subtle guidance, wisdom, and magical resonance, creating a narrative landscape rich with depth, reflection, and immersive wonder. Ultimately, the legendary battles of the Celtic world are stories of courage, strategy, ethics, and alignment with the natural and mystical orders. They reveal a culture in which human action is never isolated, but intimately connected to the land, the spirits, and the rhythms of the universe. The stories convey that heroism requires more than might. It demands insight, patience, attentiveness, and respect for the unseen forces that shape life. Through the gentle cadence of storytelling, these myths allow listeners to explore the tension, beauty, and resonance of conflict without disturbance, fostering a calm yet engaged contemplation of human experience and the sacred environment. As night settles softly over valleys and hills, the listener can imagine warriors moving quietly across misted fields, rivers flowing silently beside them, and sacred mounds observing each step. The echo of ancient strategies, courage, and moral reflection hums faintly in the landscape, reminding us that the land itself is a participant in the unfolding drama of life and myth. The interplay of battle, sacred space, and mystical guidance provides a bridge to the next chapter, where the narrative shifts toward reflection, resolution, and the quiet wisdom that emerges from both adventure and contemplation.
In the quiet Celtic landscapes, where rivers glisten under moonlight and forests murmur softly with the wind, nature was not merely a backdrop, but a living teacher. The Celts observed the world with reverence, understanding that every leaf, stone, and creature held subtle wisdom, often unnoticed by the casual eye. Trees were not only sources of wood and fruit. They were symbols of growth, endurance, and interconnectedness. The oak, revered for its strength and longevity, represented resilience and sacred knowledge. The willow, bending gracefully with the wind, taught flexibility and patience. By attuning themselves to these lessons, the Celts cultivated a worldview that embraced observation, mindfulness, and quiet reflection, fostering a deep and meditative connection to the rhythms of life. Rivers, streams, and lakes carried their own teachings. Flowing water symbolized continuity, change, and the passage of time. The gentle murmur of a stream or the reflective surface of a lake provided moments of introspection, inviting the observer to consider the subtle currents of life and the interplay of forces beyond immediate perception. Water also acted as a boundary and a bridge, guiding movement, signaling transformation, and offering a metaphor for the fluidity of experience. By listening to and watching water, the Celts learned lessons about adaptability, patience, and the importance of harmonizing with the world rather than resisting its natural rhythms. Animals, too, were esteemed as bearers of wisdom. The raven, often associated with prophecy, reminded humans of the importance of perspective, foresight, and awareness of subtle signs. Deer symbolized gentleness, attentiveness, and grace, while the wolf represented strategy, community, and instinctual understanding. By observing animal behavior, the Celts gleaned insight into ethical and practical principles, integrating lessons from the natural world into daily life, decision-making, and storytelling. Each encounter, no matter how brief, was a reflection of larger patterns, a quiet invitation to perceive the connections threading through all forms of existence. Sacred groves, hidden within forests or atop hills, were central to this wisdom. These spaces were seen as sanctuaries, places where the divine, human, and natural worlds converged. Druids and seers often retreated to groves for reflection, ritual, and teaching, recognizing that such spaces amplified clarity, insight, and perception. The interplay of sunlight through leaves, the rustle of wind, and the occasional song of a bird created an immersive environment that encouraged contemplation and attunement. In these groves, lessons of patience, observation, and ethical reflection were reinforced, cultivating a profound appreciation for the quiet intelligence present in all living things. The Celts also understood the cyclical nature of life through the lens of nature. Seasonal transitions, such as solstices and equinoxes, were not mere markers of time, but opportunities to align with the deeper patterns of existence. Spring heralded renewal, growth, and hope. Summer embodied vitality, abundance, and warmth. Autumn reflected harvest, reflection, and preparation. Winter symbolized stillness, introspection, and endurance. By observing these cycles carefully, they cultivated an awareness of balance, timing, and harmony that informed both spiritual practices and practical life. This attentiveness fostered resilience, adaptability, and an ability to navigate the uncertainties of human experience with grace and insight. Plants and herbs carried wisdom, both practical and symbolic. Certain herbs were used for healing, protection, or ritual purposes, revealing an intimate understanding of their properties and energies. Sage, yarrow, and mistletoe, for example, were respected not only for their tangible benefits, but also for their spiritual resonance. Harvesting and using these plants required mindfulness, gratitude, and respect, reinforcing the idea that every interaction with the natural world was an ethical and reflective act. Through these practices, humans were reminded of their responsibility to observe, honor, and harmonize with the world, maintaining a gentle, reciprocal relationship with the forces surrounding them. Wind, sunlight, and weather patterns were equally instructive. The rustle of leaves, the gentle sway of grass, or the soft passage of clouds offered lessons in impermanence, attentiveness, and subtlety. Nature communicated in quiet rhythms, teaching that not all guidance arrives loudly or directly. Much of it is whispered, requiring observation, patience, and openness. The Celts developed a keen sensitivity to these signs, learning to respond with care, contemplation, and alignment rather than force or haste. In doing so, they cultivated an enduring sense of balance, intuition, and quiet wisdom. Ultimately, the hidden wisdom of nature is a recurring theme that threads through Celtic myths, rituals, and daily life. It teaches that the world is alive with knowledge, guidance, and interconnectedness, accessible to those who listen, observe, and reflect. By cultivating mindfulness and attunement to these subtle rhythms, humans can navigate challenges, make informed decisions, and engage with life in a thoughtful, ethical, and harmonious manner. This perspective reinforces the Celtic understanding that every element of the environment, no matter how small or seemingly ordinary, contributes to the broader tapestry of existence. As night settles over the hills, forests, and rivers, the listener can imagine the soft, almost imperceptible lessons whispered by the world around them. Leaves tremble gently, water ripples quietly, and the subtle song of nocturnal creatures resonates with hidden meaning. In this calm, immersive space, the listener is invited to attune to the subtle guidance of nature, embracing reflection, observation, and quiet understanding. The hidden wisdom of the natural world serves as a gentle bridge to the final chapter, where the enduring lessons, mysteries, and reflections of the Celtic world are brought together in quiet contemplation and poetic closure. As the journey through the Celtic world draws to a gentle close, a quiet reflection settles over the hills, forests, rivers, and ancient sites that have carried us through myth, history, and imagination. The stories we have encountered of druids, heroes, tricksters, sacred objects, prophecies, and legendary battles invite us to pause and consider the delicate interplay between the human and the mystical, the known and the unknown. These narratives are not merely tales of adventure or spectacle. They're reflections on life, morality, courage, and the rhythms of the world that surround and sustain us. In their calm, immersive cadence, they encourage the listener to engage with the subtle wisdom of the past, to attune to the quiet lessons hidden in nature, and to honor the mysterious currents that shape existence. The enduring power of Celtic myths lies in their ability to balance contrasts, light and shadow, joy and sorrow, certainty and mystery. Heroes face challenges not simply to conquer, but to learn. Tricksters disrupt, not merely to confuse, but to reveal insight. Sacred objects are not possessions, but vessels of guidance and reflection. Each element emphasizes that life, like myth, is layered, nuanced, and deeply interconnected. In observing these patterns, listeners can sense the subtle echoes of ancient wisdom in their own lives, discovering that courage, patience, attentiveness, and reflection are timeless qualities that transcend the boundaries of history and culture. The druids, with their enigmatic presence, remain perhaps the most evocative symbol of this enduring wisdom. Though much about them is lost to history, their philosophy, attunement to nature, and ethical guidance resonate through time. They remind us that knowledge is not solely about accumulation, but about perception, balance, and the ethical application of understanding. Their quiet influence, woven into ceremonies, stories, and sacred spaces, encourages us to cultivate our own awareness, to listen attentively to the world, and to consider the moral and spiritual dimensions of our choices. The Druidic ideal is an invitation to harmonize intellect, intuition, and observation, offering a calm and reflective model for engaging with life's mysteries. Heroes and their trials offer a complementary lesson. In facing both external challenges and internal dilemmas, they demonstrate that courage is inseparable from ethical discernment and self-reflection. The stories of Cu Chulainn, Finn Mac Cumhale, and others illustrate that heroism is not simply about triumph, but about engagement with the complexities of the human experience. They teach patience, resilience, and the understanding that mistakes, setbacks, and moral ambiguities are integral to growth and insight. By observing the interplay of fate, choice, and consequence, we can draw parallels to our own lives, recognizing that wisdom is cultivated through attentive reflection and thoughtful action, not only through achievement. Tricksters, with their playful mischief, remind us of the value of curiosity, adaptability, and humility. They teach that wisdom often emerges from unexpected circumstances, subtle observation, and the willingness to question assumptions. Through humor and cleverness, tricksters illuminate the invisible patterns of life, encouraging a reflective engagement with uncertainty. Their stories cultivate patience and attentiveness, showing that insight is often quiet, indirect, and found in the spaces between action and consequence. The gentle rhythm of these tales encourages both engagement and calm, sustaining the meditative tone that carries through the Celtic narrative landscape. Sacred objects, prophecies, and omens deepen this reflection, highlighting the subtle threads that link human experience to natural and mystical forces. Cauldrons, swords, standing stones, and ritual artifacts remind us that meaning can be embedded in the material world, while prophecies and omens encourage attentiveness to patterns, cycles, and signs. Together, these elements teach the importance of observation, ethical reflection, and harmony with both visible and invisible realms. They invite the listener to consider that the world itself carries guidance, often gentle and indirect, for those willing to perceive and respect it. The hidden wisdom of nature, explored in the previous section, serves as both a practical and spiritual bridge to reflection. Trees, rivers, animals, and seasonal cycles provide lessons in resilience, patience, adaptability, and interconnectedness. By attuning to these rhythms, we cultivate awareness and mindfulness, gaining insight into life's subtle currents. The Celts recognized that human existence is inseparable from the patterns of the natural world, and that ethical, reflective engagement is a key path to understanding. This perspective, quiet and immersive, allows listeners to feel the pulse of the world around them and appreciate the subtle interplay of forces that shape life, myth, and human experience. Ultimately, the enduring mysteries of the Celtic world lie not in concrete answers, but in the invitation to observe, reflect, and harmonize with the cycles, patterns, and stories around us. The myths do not dictate action or certainty. Instead, they cultivate a contemplative awareness, guiding the listener to navigate life with patience, humility, and insight. They emphasize that mystery is not a void to fear, but a rhythm to honor, a presence that encourages reflection and curiosity. Through the gentle cadence of storytelling, the listener is invited to embrace both what is known and what is hidden, finding calm and insight in the interwoven fabric of history, myth, and nature. As the night deepens and soft shadows stretch across the hills, rivers, and forests, the listener may imagine the whispers of the past lingering in the air. The quiet rustle of leaves, the gentle flow of water, and the distant calls of nocturnal creatures echo with lessons, stories, and subtle guidance. In this serene space, the reflections of the Celtic world unfold naturally, leaving a lasting sense of wonder, calm, and meditative curiosity. Each tale, symbol, and natural rhythm contributes to a profound understanding that the human experience is intertwined with the unseen, the mystical, and the eternal, offering a final, contemplative bridge between myth and lived experience. In closing, the Celtic myths, their heroes, druids, tricksters, sacred objects, and natural wisdom remind us that life is a delicate interplay of courage, observation, ethics, and reflection. Mystery endures, but it is a guiding, gentle presence rather than a source of fear. Through attunement, curiosity, and mindful engagement, the listener is left with a sense of connection to both the past and the quiet, eternal rhythms that surround all life. The journey through the forgotten myths of the Celtic world comes to rest, not in finality, but in a reflective, calm space, where wonder, insight, and poetic rhythm linger softly, carrying the listener gently toward dreams, contemplation, and the quiet embrace of night.